We're all influenced by style, and these influences can come from near and far. Hi, I'm Alan Smith. I thought it'd be fun for us to take a tour around the world, as it were, in today's show, and just take a look at how different cultures express themselves in the gardens they create. Our travels will take us to Holland, where we'll visit a beautifully restored palace that was once the home of William III and his wife, Queen Mary. And speaking of William, we'll see the influence his Dutch gardens had on America when we drop in at colonial Williamsburg. We'll also cross the country and trace America's Spanish roots at the Carmel Mission in California. In England, we'll visit Chumley Castle and meet the driving force behind this beautiful landscape. And we'll visit the Chicago Botanic Garden and explore this beautiful Japanese garden. It's made of 3 islands, of which only 2 you can visit. Find out why the 3rd is off limits. So get ready for some travel right after this. When I visit a place like this, I feel like I'm walking through the pages of a storybook. Beautiful landscape, castle on the hill. I halfway expect to see a knight riding over that hill in search of a fair maiden or a dragon. Well, this is Chumley Castle, and it's in the countryside in northwest England. A beautiful setting for a magnificent garden. Now, while many of the gardens you see here in England reflect bits and pieces of gardens created centuries before, here at Chumley Castle, Lord and Lady Chumley developed a piece of this pastoral landscape, a park-like setting, and created their own garden in the 1960s. The early 19th century Gothic castle is framed by a picturesque view. Across the deer park, your gaze is immediately drawn upward to the castle. Now, framing views is a theme you'll see repeated over and over here at Chumley. And with views like this, why not? Just below the castle, the grounds come alive with designs created by Lady Chumley herself. Almost hidden behind this secret garden-style entrance, the Temple Garden is always a highlight of any visit to Chumley. I admire the way Lady Chumley has held this garden as a surprise to her visitors. Majestic stone columns rise up to a dome of ornate ironwork. A pond in the background with its Monet-esque bridge makes the setting complete. Lady Chumley, would you consider the Temple Garden really the signature of the gardens here at Chumley?
Well, I suppose so, yes.
You know, I think the lesson you can learn by looking at this lake is that green is a color too. There's so many different shades of green.
Ah, yes, you're right. And in the spring particularly. What do you think of the lady about to bathe down there? Some of my friends go down on their knees and say, for God's sake, get rid of it.
Yeah.
And others say they like it. And actually it comes out rather well in a photograph.
Yeah. Yeah.
But she's too white.
Yeah, the scale of her was small, and she is white, right?
Exactly, she's too small.
Because everything here is so
she's
dramatic.
Not to size, and she should be.
Scale is an important part of any garden, but especially in a garden with a home so large. Even in the middle of August, there's a lot going on in this planting. You have barberry and purple cotinus planted in the back, with aconitum or the monk's hood, creating sharp spires that come up through the border, along with a few bulbs like Galtonia, called the summer hyacinth. Other tall spiky plants you can find in this border are verbascum and agapanthus, along with some very brightly colored penstemon. These are planted in combination with some annuals, such as cosmos. Now, one of the nicest additions to this garden in the way of annuals for me are the different types of Nicotiana. Lady Chumley has planted Nicotiana sylvestris, which gets very tall and has these white pendulous blooms, as well as a Nicotiana called Lansdorfii with tiny little chartreuse blooms. Here's the Langsdorffia here.
Langsdorffia, yes.
Yeah, this is a very good little Nicotiana. And you know, it's the kind of thing that people could grow in their gardens, an annual that takes you beyond petunias and marigolds.
Well, exactly. It's so much prettier than the other ones.
I think so too.
It does grow very big actually, but I think it's rather shady for it there.
Yeah. I really like this chartreuse color. But I think the most important part of this border, and really any border, is the structure. And what we have here is a backdrop or a planting of plants that give us the framework that we need to really appreciate the flowers. Again, you have the barberry, the smoke tree, these beautiful silverleaf pears, and various roses. Two varieties I grow, one called Sally Holmes and the other Penelope. A lot goes into making these borders beautiful in terms of the design as well as the conditions here. Of course, plenty of rain certainly helps. But I think that the reason these borders always look so good is that there's something coming on all the time. None of these flowers all bloom at once. There were geraniums several months ago. The roses were blooming just last month. But now you have lots of color coming on in the way of the penstemons, this beautiful agapanthus and phlox. And even later, we'll have asters that will come on. So it's important to remember that you should have a progression of bloom in the border right up until the first frost. There's so many wonderful plants to choose from. This is actually quite easy to achieve. Coming up next, we'll explore a touch of the Orient at the Chicago Botanic Garden. Welcome to Sancho Inn, or the Garden of Three Islands at the Chicago Botanic Garden, as we continue to look at how different cultures influence garden styles. This is a beautiful view of the Japanese garden. Now, this is one of the first gardens built here at the Chicago Botanic Garden.
Yes, it is. And we're fortunate to have had such forward-thinking creators of the garden. They took advantage of the 81 acres of water that we have and created the Japanese garden on 3 islands. The third island that you can see at the end here is a sacred place, and it's not walked on. There's a small ramp that goes underwater so that people can go out and maintain the garden, but it's done with great care, and I believe it's to respect the dead. The shrubs are pruned to look like stones, which are symbols of tranquility, I believe, and the trees are pruned to look older and ancient.
Symbolism plays an important role in designing Japanese gardens.
It does, and you can see that in some of the elements that we have. The bridge, the Zen garden. The Zen garden is a classic part of Japanese landscape design, and that's what Japanese gardens are all about. It's a symbolism of relating nature, and so that when someone sits in a Zen garden and meditates, they're able to enter that space in nature that we feel in our hearts.
I see. So taking those feelings and that experience and distilling it into those simple, pure forms.
Yes. It sounds complicated, but it's really a natural experience, and we do it all the time.
Well, when you walk through that Japanese garden, you certainly sense the tranquility. It really comes through.
It's extremely calming. Just looking out at the view here, and I walk in the morning and walk past this, and it really starts my day in a nice way.
If there's one thing I enjoy almost as much as gardening, it's history. And this place certainly has a story to tell. It's the Paleis Het Loo in the Netherlands. This was once the home of Holland's King William, who was married to Queen Mary II. During their time, the gardens looked much as they do today, but that wasn't always the case.
For Holland, it's a very large restoration, and there was a lot of discussion also about when it started. And it was decided to restore the palace in the Baroque style, in the style of the 17th and 18th century, and also the style in which it was built originally by King William III. And the architect who did the restoration, he said, well, if I restore a Baroque palace, I should also restore the garden, because otherwise it's only half a job.
Speaking specifically to some of the plant varieties, are these plants that we would have seen if we were walking in this garden with William III?
Yes, we try very much to have the plants that existed and were known at the end of the 17th century. And in the 17th century, the plants in the garden were also kind of collection of plants, and that's why they are planted so separately. For us, you're now accustomed to borders with very colorful borders.
Right.
But in the 17th century, they were a kind of collection of plants, and you could see every plant separately. Because
so you could study each one of them.
Yeah.
Now, tell me a little bit about the way this garden was actually constructed, or we should say reconstructed, because I think in the 19th century this was a very different place, wasn't it?
Yeah, this in the 19th century was what we call a landscape garden, English landscape garden. In the early 19th century, Louis Napoleon, the brother of Napoleon, lived in this palace. And a geometrical garden like this was old-fashioned at that time.
And so this sunken garden that we're in now was actually filled?
It was filled up.
I see.
And before we started restoration, we did tried excavations to find look for the foundations of the fountains, and then we found already some mosaics of the fountains.
I think these 17th century landscapes are better appreciated if you can look down on them.
On it, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why here, for instance, from the roof of the palace, you have a very good view of the garden.
Well, we have, of course, in Williamsburg, Virginia, the early 18th century governor's palace steps out into, in Williamsburg, steps out into a beautiful 17th century garden like this as well. Very orderly.
I've seen it. I have been there a long time ago, and I think it wasn't restored then. I remember.
Right.
They are very nice. I think we are very jealous about it.
Up next, we'll visit an American namesake for King William, Williamsburg, Virginia. Plus, we'll find out about the early Spanish influence on West Coast gardens. So don't go away. In today's show, we're exploring how different cultures throughout the world express their own individual style through the gardens they create. Now, if you've missed out on seeing some of these fantastic destinations, you can always check out my website. That's balensmith.com. One of these fantastic destinations was the Paleis Het Loo in the Netherlands, where we saw the amazing restoration of the palace's 17th century gardens. These would have been the grounds that King William III would have strolled along with his wife, Queen Mary II, and members of their court. William and Mary's gardening style was echoed in the creation of the Governor's Palace Gardens in Williamsburg, Virginia, named for King William, of course. Kent Brinkley, a landscape architect with Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, takes us on a tour of these restored grounds.
The palace was started in 1706, which of course was early in the reign of William and Mary, and you can see the influence of the Dutch style in the architecture as well as in the way the gardens were laid out. At the time that the palace is being built, this style of gardening was all the rage, and it was characterized by rigid geometry, plants arranged in parterres, which is a design on the ground, and also the use of topiary as vertical accents in the garden was all intended to impress the visitor with the power and might of the crown. And this was probably the epitome of the gardener's art in the colony of Virginia in the 18th century, and that was the intent. The Governor's Palace was one of two sites in town, being royal institutions, that employed the services of a professionally trained English or Scottish gardener. And of course, they were very much in demand because the gentry would say, hey, why don't you come over and work in my garden for a couple of hours, I'll pay you some extra. And so through that means, horticultural knowledge was shared. And so you have the governor really served as a trendsetter in many ways, including the art of gardening, and he helped through his staff to really spread that awareness and that appreciation for gardening as a fine art in the upper levels, the upper gentry of the colony.
Certainly all of the work that's been done here in Williamsburg is impressive. I mean, you all have recreated the 18th century in a way that I think sets a precedent for the rest of the country. But why? What's the point?
Well, that's a very good question. It's not enough to read about life in the past in a book. It's not enough to see pictures of what some of these places may have looked like in that time period. You really need to walk through a space, whether it's an interior room or whether it's a garden room, if you will, to really get a feeling for what that area is like and sense them not just visually, but through all of our senses.
Up next, early Spanish influences in modern California.
We often forget that at the same time Jamestown was founded on the eastern coast of the United States, Spain sent an expedition along the western coast as a map-making expedition, and it is they who named this place Carmel, the oldest name to appear on a map of the United States, taken from its namesake in the Holy Land, meaning Garden of God.
The Carmel Mission and its beautiful grounds stand today as a monument to the Spanish missionary, Father Serra, who left his home to come to the wilderness of 16th century California. I visited with Sir Richard Menn, the curator of the mission, about the influences on these gardens.
This was the favorite of all of the missions that Father Serra founded. It's so much reminded him of his native land that he had a special affection for this place.
Now, where was he from originally?
The island of Majorca, from the small village of Petra. Today we tend to think of gardens as a way of embellishing our surroundings with beauty and as perhaps a place to relax or enjoy. But here, where we found flowers in the mission during that period, they had to serve real purposes, such as for medicines or for spices or herbs that could be used for things such as obtaining dyes for weaving of blankets or the making of paint.
This composition of the prickly pear cactus is stunning.
And here again we have an example where something was not only raised for its attractiveness and its beauty, but also it was a source of food. The leaves could be eaten in stews and just as a vegetable, as well as the fruit that it bears. Although we see a different purpose to the mission today, it's still in a sense a center of community. It's the site of the local parish church of Carmel, as well as providing an elementary school, a site for community events, a place where concerts are held, and hopefully just a place that people can wander and find a sense of peace and maybe a little beauty that otherwise they wouldn't find.
A great companion to P. Allen Smith Gardens is our website, pallensmith.com. Log on to learn more about today's topic. You'll also get hands-on gardening tips, design ideas, lessons in garden history, delicious recipes, and crafts projects that will take you from season to season, all beautifully illustrated with thousands of colorful images that will inspire your creativity. Plus, don't miss Allen's free weekly newsletter delivered straight to your inbox, all just a mouse click away at pallensmith.com.
I hope you've enjoyed today's show. We've been on quite a tour and seen a variety of styles, from the English garden at Chumley Castle to the Dutch palace at Het Lo, and seen what the first Spanish missionaries created on the west coast in Carmel. And back on the east coast, we've seen what the first European settlers did in Williamsburg, to the Japanese garden here at the Chicago Botanic Garden. Now I hope you'll take some time to carve out a little piece of paradise for yourself. And if you'd like to know more about these garden destinations, just check out my website. That's pallensmith.com. Until next time, from the garden, I'm Allen Smith.
this garden I dream of a bed of flowers. Bluebirds sing of the beauty all around us. And every time the sun comes out, I can't help but smile. Oh, no, I can't help but smile.